This is the Power Break Podcast number 029, an interview with missionary Ray Call. Hi, everyone. This is Bob Brubaker. We're happy to bring you another interview podcast, a story of perseverance that we trust will encourage you to keep pressing on in the race of life. Today, I'm sharing with you an interview with Ray Call, who has been a missionary in Mexico and Uruguay, and soon to take a new post as a missionary in Belize. This interview with missionary Ray Call was recorded at the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in America in Dallas, Texas. I'm here with my friend Ray Call, who is a missionary with MTW. Welcome, Ray.
Hi, Bob. Nice to be here.
We're talking about perseverance as I do on this podcast, and you have persevered for how long as a missionary?
Well, we became missionaries about 13 years ago. We left for language school about 11 years ago.
Okay, so when I first met you, you had been a missionary on the border of Mexico and the United States, right?
Yes, that's right. We were in Mexicali, in San Diego, Tijuana area.
Okay, and how long did you serve there?
We lived a couple years in Mexico and served about 3 years in the San Diego, Tijuana area, and then we transitioned into Uruguay.
Uruguay was a very interesting transition. That's kind of like a culture shock, wasn't it?
Yes, it's very different from Mexico. It's a much more European-dominant culture where people are largely European in descent, so they really don't look Latino, if you will. They look more like Spanish or Italian or German, and they certainly have more food. Their cuisine is more Italian and Spanish cuisine. They don't eat rice or beans or tortillas. They're typically eaten in Mexico or Guatemala and other places like the Caribbean.
Well, let's go back to your time in Mexicali, as you called it. What was the biggest adjustment?
The biggest adjustment for us was coming straight out of language school and learning Spanish. So the first time I went to the grocery store there, even though I'd been in language school, the checker asked me a question. And I said, what? in Spanish. And she had to repeat it like 3 times, and I still didn't quite understand. And then she just kind of waved her hand in despair and began checking my items. Later on, I found out that she was just asking basic permission to begin scanning my items, which is a different cultural tradition that they have there than what we typically see in the United States. So it's not just about language, it's about learning the culture as well and the expectations of the script that you have to follow in a public place like the grocery store.
Wow. You never think about things like that. I mean, when you think about going on the mission field.
Yes, it's challenging because it's not just about vocabulary and grammar, but learning what to expect. For instance, if you go to the restaurant, typically in Latin America, the server will not give you the check. You have to ask for it, so you can be sitting there all night. We were in New York City at a Dominican from the Dominican Republic restaurant, and we were just sitting there and waiting for our check. And we were like, what's going on? We're not getting our check. Because that was our first experience in that kind of a cultural environment. And we had to learn that typically in Latin America, you have to ask for your check or else they won't bring it.
Wow. Yeah. What was the challenge to share the gospel as after you've learned the language? Say, when you were in the Mexicali area.
In Mexico, many people believe in God, so there's a large percentage of Roman Catholics that live there. So it's very easy to talk about God in that sense. Now, many of the Catholics don't go to church or Mass, so it's a challenge to share with them the gospel. But it's not really a challenge to start talking about it, but it's really more challenging to see them react to it, if you will.
How about in Uruguay? How was that?
In Uruguay, it's a much more secular environment where people don't really want to talk about the things of God. They want to evade that issue altogether. So they typically change the subject. Or if they do believe in God, or not, if they do want to talk about the things of God, they'll typically come out as atheist or agnostic or something in their approach. And they'll start arguing about the problem of evil, typically experientially, like they'll know somebody who's died, a child who's died of leukemia. One time a taxi driver said he didn't believe in God because he knew somebody who died of leukemia. And it's very sad, but a difficult, challenging topic. But we explain that it's a very difficult topic even for Christians, but we trust that God is good and God is sovereign, And we know that he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die for sinners on the cross. And so a God that would go to such great lengths to love us and sacrifice for us, we know we can trust him even if we don't always understand why he allows bad things to happen to people like little children who are very precious.
Ray, one of the things I really respect about you, now here you are explaining difficult questions with a language that was not your first language.
It's a challenge sometimes, but the Lord gives us wisdom and strength and, lots of practice over the last 11 years, basically. So going to Uruguay, we had to learn a different accent than in Mexico. So the first 4 or 5 months, it was very difficult to understand people there. But after 4 or 5 months, our ears began to adjust. And now it's easier for me to understand a Uruguayan person speaking Spanish than it is other places like Mexico, whereas it was quite the reverse before.
Let's talk about times of perseverance on the mission field, either in Mexicali or in Uruguay. Did you have any discouraging times? Silly question, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's typical for missionaries to experience challenging times, being in a different culture, being so far away from family, trying to operate in another language, not knowing the cultural traditions and even holidays. So sometimes I would go to the bank and find that it was closed, not knowing that it was closed because it was a holiday, because, just learning the environment there. So it's very challenging that way. And then learning to be humble and to know that sometimes you're going to feel like a 3-year-old because you don't know the traditions or the correct way to act in any given situation. But you have to learn that, or you have to ask people and depend on them. So you become very dependent on the Lord and then also on other people.
Wow. Let's talk about the other challenge. Let's see. How many children do you have?
We have 8 children. Blessings from the Lord. 5.
That's right.
5
He's a
boys,
blessed man.
5 boys and 3 girls.
Now, how challenging was that to travel to the mission field with 8 children?
The Lord strengthened us. It was doable, but it was challenging to travel in the airport. We had to fly from the United States to Uruguay with a boatload of items, so to speak, in our possession, suitcases and bins. Getting off the airplane, it was very difficult to push the carts that we loaded up through the airport with little kids. So I had a problem actually going through security because they told me I couldn't leave and enter back in to help my family.
Oh.
So it was just Michelle and then me, and then trying to get some of our older kids to push the other carts and suitcases. So really we didn't have enough people to push all of it. So that was a challenge for us.
Wow. Well, so if I remember right, you have a daughter that's married now.
Yes, she's married and just graduated college, so we're really thankful for that.
Thank the Lord for that. Well, now you're on to a new mission field. You've been reassigned to Belize. Tell us about that.
Well, we just finished up a missionary term in Uruguay, cooperating in partnership with the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. So now Mission to the World, missions agency that we've been working with the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America, has asked us to consider going to Belize, and we've accepted that. We believe the Lord is leading us there. And so there'll be exciting ministry serving the church there. There's a Presbyterian denomination with 16 churches, 5 of which are self-governing. There are 6 pastors. So the other churches that are not self-governing are still what we call missions churches. So they're basically already meeting for worship, but they don't have officers, their own leadership that provides leadership like elders and deacons. So that one of the goals will be help them to establish that leadership. Also helping some of the pastors fill the pulpit, as there's only 6 pastors and 16 churches. Lord willing, I can help out with filling the pulpit for some of those men and helping partner with those pastors, hopefully being an encouragement.
Now, from what I understand, a lot of noise going on here. We're at the annual conference of the Presbyterian Church in America in Dallas, Texas, and so there's some noise in the background. But nevertheless, from my understanding, isn't the primary language in Belize isn't English? Is it English?
Yes, it's formerly called British Honduras, so it was a possession of Great Britain. It's part of the British Commonwealth, so it became independent in the early 1980s, and their national language is English officially. But one of the pastors actually told me that by some counts, something like 61% of the population prefer Spanish as their heart language. Whereas many people know Spanish and English, they speak Spanish at home. While in the schools, they learn English, and they practice English in school and government and other arenas.
So you being a man that knows both will be a step forward.
Yeah, that'll be helpful to be able to speak Spanish and interact with the people in their own heart language, as well as many of the Presbyterian churches are Spanish dominant, so prefer Spanish and actually worship in Spanish. One church, at least, that we went to is bilingual, so they operate in Spanish but also in English if they have attendees who are speaking English only, so they can help really encourage them and reach out to them as visitors.
Well, folks, I appreciate my friend Ray Call. He's been laboring as a missionary, and he has persevered through many times of changes in his life, and yet he's persevered in his walk with the Lord and his desire to share the gospel with others. And Ray, just tell us, what is the basis of you persevering as a God-called missionary to go out to the ends of the earth to share the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Because I believe that the Lord has called us into the full-time ministry, and us particularly into cross-cultural ministry on the missions field. And we have a passion for helping introduce people to the Lord Jesus Christ, and we desire that many, many people will come to know Christ and know that when they die that they'll go to heaven. Also that Christ will be exalted in all of the earth, and that the church will be established in every nation, every people group in the world. We would love to see Christ Church expand, and more people serving the Lord and worshiping, and seeing lives changed, and families changed, and even communities changed.
If someone wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do so? I mean, as far as touch base with you through MTW, or how?
They can look for they can search for our name on the Mission to the World, mtw.org, or visit callmissionaries.org, which is our website, callmissionaries.org.
We'll put that on our show notes for today's podcast.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks, Ray, for joining us. This has been Ray Call with Bob Brubaker. Thank you for joining us on the podcast today. This has been the Power Break Podcast interview program with missionary Ray Call. For more information about Ray's ministry or missions in general, you can look him up on the Mission to the World website, www.mtw.org. Or you can check out his personal website, callmissionaries.org. You'll find the links in our show notes of today's podcast, which is number 029. In show notes, books, weekly Power Break blog, and more at bobbrubaker.com. Please leave a comment and a rating wherever you have downloaded the podcast, and please help us spread the word about the Power Break Podcast.